Nothing says summer better than biting into a tasty, juicy, vine-ripened tomato. And dwarf tomatoes are ideal for getting you lots of them, even in small spaces. Today, I've got some great tips for you for getting the biggest harvest from these pint-sized plants. Whether you're growing in containers, in ground, or even straw bales, the principles are going to be the same. Knowing how to water properly, which fertilizer to use and when to apply it, and how to prune properly. Believe me, doing these things the right way will get you the most tomatoes from your dwarf plants. For those of you who are new to this channel, my name is Linda and I'd like to welcome you to Veggy 360. Join me with these wonderful pollinators as they're flying around. Forgive the noise, they're very noisy. The first key is water properly. You need to know when, how, and how much water to apply. Now, it may sound silly for me to say water only when needed, but in reality, the soil surface may look dry, but down by the root ball, there might be just enough moisture there. So the easiest way to tell is to stick your finger down into the soil to the second knuckle. If it feels moist, and when you pull it out and soil sticks to your finger, you're good to go. No need to water. Another clue is if the plants look wilted. It's not uncommon, though, for the plants to look wilted in the middle of the day, particularly when the sun is blaring down on those plants and the temperatures are in the 90s. But what you want to watch for is, do they still look wilted in the evening? Then the plants are going to be under stress and you're going to need to water them. Morning is the best time to water, but you can also water in the late afternoon. You just need to make sure, though, that the leaves have a chance to dry before nighttime. Because containers can only hold so much water, they're going to dry out quickly. So during days like this in the middle of the summer, you're probably going to need to water them twice a day. As to how to water, well, you want to avoid getting the leaves wet. Water at the soil level, like using a drip irrigation system or a soaker hose. If you do have to hand water, make sure that you're holding the nozzle close to the ground so you have little chance of splash up, because any soil that splashes up onto the lower leaves, you run the risk of soil-borne diseases. It's best to water longer so that the water has a chance to go down deeper, down into the root system. It'll encourage the plant roots to grow down deeper, where the soil moisture level is going to be more uniform and the temperatures will also be cooler. You can use mulch to help retain the moisture, and it also will help minimize that splash up of the soil-borne diseases. How much to water is going to depend on the weather conditions, the temperature, humidity, rainfall, and wind, as well as the root demands on the soil. Lots of roots, going to need lots of water in that soil. When you have high density planting, like in raised beds and containers, you're going to need to water more often because that ratio of roots to soil is going to be higher. Smaller containers, you're going to have less soil, so less water reservoir. Those also need to be watered more often. Minimum pot size for dwarf tomatoes is 5 gallons. But if you move it up to a larger pot, say a 10-gallon pot, you've got more soil available, so you won't have to water quite as often. It's also easier to keep soil moisture levels more consistent in larger pots, which leads me to some watering issues to avoid, such as fluctuating moisture levels. You want to keep that soil level consistent, because if you don't, it can lead to blossom end rot and cracking. You know, I get lots of questions about blossom end rot, which is when the blossom end of the fruit starts to rot. This is actually caused by a calcium deficiency in the plant. The soil might actually have enough calcium there, so you don't necessarily need to add calcium to the soil. It's just that the plant can't take that calcium up because of the inconsistent soil moisture level. Inconsistent watering can also lead to the fruit cracking. This is particularly problematic in your large slicers or your beefsteak type tomatoes. You want to avoid overwatering as well, because this can be as bad as underwatering. What happens when you overwater is that water saturates the soil, depletes the oxygen, and literally your plant drowns. Remember to harvest before the rain if the ground has been particularly dry. This will help avoid the tomatoes cracking. The second key is to fertilize properly. Fertilizer needs will change at different stages of growth, so it's important to get the right fertilizer applied at the right time. Doing this will help you get the healthiest plants that are the most resistant to disease, which in turn will give you the biggest harvest of great tasting fruit. When choosing your fertilizer, pay attention to the letters on the package N, P, and K. N stands for nitrogen, which is critical for rapid growth and healthy foliage. P stands for phosphorus. This supports growth and the development of roots and fruits. K stands for potassium, and this supports flower and fruit growth, as well as being important for overall health by supporting better photosynthesis and disease tolerance. So the easiest way to remember this, what each of these letters do, remember up, down, and around. Up, nitrogen. Down, phosphorus for the roots and fruit. All around is the potassium, supports the overall plant health. You can either do organic or synthetic fertilizer, personal choice. I happen to like to use organic because there's less chance of me burning the plant by using too much fertilizer. There's different forms that you can choose from as well. You can either do a granule, powder, or a liquid. It can be a slow release or readily available, like in the liquids. Whichever you choose, though, you want to make sure that you're following the directions in order to get the biggest harvest and have the healthiest plants. How much and how often is going to be determined whether you're growing in ground or in containers. When growing in containers, you're providing everything that that plant has available for growing. And as you water throughout the season, you're also going to be washing out the nutrients from that soil. It also depends on the potting mix that you're using. I happen to like to use 1/3 compost in my potting mix because it adds organic matter, nutrients, and also has good water holding capacity, which is really, really important when growing in containers during the middle of summer where those temperatures are really high. I recently did a trial looking at different soil amendments to see which ones help maintain the moisture level better. In my potting mix, check out the video on the link below. It's called Save Water, Save the Garden. You can see evidence here in my strawberry planter box behind me. If you're growing in ground, it's best to test the soil regularly in order to see if you have any nutrient deficiencies present. You also get a good read on the pH, which is critical for helping the plant take up the nutrients more effectively. If you're going to get maximum yield when growing your tomatoes at the ideal pH, which is 6.2 to 6.8. If the pH is too high or too low, it doesn't matter how much fertilizer you put in there. The plant is only going to be able to take up so much, and it will only grow so well. You can check with your local cooperative extension service, or you can use a commercially available test kit in order to test your soil. As I mentioned earlier, it's important to apply the right fertilizer at the right time. At planting time, you want to use more nitrogen because you're wanting that plant to grow faster and stronger. Now, once the flower buds start to develop, then switch over to one that has the higher middle letter, phosphorus, P, because you want to be able to provide the nutrients to support good fruit production. Now, once the tomato is like this, where you've got good fruit set and some nice blooms forming, switch back over to a balanced fertilizer so that you're providing plant's ability to maintain good growth and continued fruit development. The third key is to prune properly. Unlike indeterminate tomatoes, you should not prune out the suckers in these. Dwarf tomatoes will continue to grow and produce fruit throughout the whole growing season until they're killed off by first frost, just like the indeterminates, but they're going to be growing at half the rate as an indeterminate tomato. So the growth is going to be much more manageable. The plant will stay much more compact. So you really don't need to prune out those suckers. As a matter of fact, if you do prune out the suckers on dwarfs, you're cutting down on yields. Something else to consider is that dwarf tomatoes have larger leaves for the size of the plants compared to determinate tomatoes. Look at the difference between dwarf tomato leaves and the determinate tomato leaves. Really, really big, especially considering how compact the dwarf plants are. With a compact plant size and larger leaves, what ends up happening is the center of the plant gets really, really crowded, and it reduces the airflow. So, and this is especially true if you have a heavy fruit set. What ends up happening then is you have a higher risk of plant disease in this situation because there's less airflow. What you want to do is to carefully prune out the center leaves in order to improve that airflow, and then strategically prune out other leaves as well to also improve airflow. Now, regardless of whatever type tomato you're growing, you want to prune out those lower leaves. Anything below the first fruit set, and anything that's close to the ground or touching the ground. This will help minimize soil-borne disease spread. You also want to prune out any diseased leaves to keep disease from spreading, but make sure that you're sterilizing your pruners between plants using alcohol or a Clorox solution in order to minimize spreading disease further. Check back later on a follow-up video on leaf spot diseases and how to control them. With proper watering, fertilizing, and pruning, you can have lots of great tasting tomatoes all season long. Watch for my next video in which I'll give you even more tips for growing lots of great tasting dwarf tomatoes. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Please help me grow more gardeners by sharing this video with your friends who would also like to grow their own food. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye now.